For years, I never told anyone the story of the pointy shoes. Not my parents, not my sisters or my friends. It was something that I kept completely to myself. My own sinister little secret. It was an incident in my life that only lasted for 5 hours but seemed like an eternity. It happened to me when I was 7 years old, but I remember like it was last night. My dad's brother, my Uncle James, had a small pig farm in southern Indiana. He was married to my Aunt Helen and had 3 kids, just like our family. However, where my parents had 2 daughters and me, James and Helen had 2 sons and 1 daughter. The boys JJ and Max were aged 10 and 11. Their sister Patricia was older than the rest of us. I believe she was 15 or 16 at the time of this story. She was an odd girl, to say the least. My sisters and I never quite trusted her for various reasons, but it was kind of a known thing within the family that Patricia was someone you had to keep an eye on. On the day of the pointy shoes incident, my dad and I were visiting the farm. For reasons I can't quite recall, I ended up being left there by my dad to spend the night. I remember I didn't really want to, but also didn't want to hurt my aunt's feelings, so I didn't speak up. Needless to say, that was the one and only time I would ever spend the night on the farm. When it came time for my dad to leave, he tasseled my hair with his hand and told me he would be back to get me in the morning. I remember when I turned around to join the others, Patricia was looking at me with a strange, knowing look on her face. She knew I was uncomfortable to be there, and I could tell it pleased her. There was still a few hours of daylight left when my dad's truck pulled out of the drive. That time was spent playing with my cousins around the farm. JJ and Max took me down to the chicken coop to show me how things worked on a farm. I have to admit, at age 7, I was pretty intrigued by it all. That is until Patricia spoke up from behind us. One thing I forgot to mention was that my cousin Patricia had this weird habit of making us younger kids call per Patty Pie when there were no grown-ups around. So Patty Pie surprises us from behind the chicken coop and tells us she wants to show us something. My cousins JJ and Max were good-hearted and fun kids to hang around, but even they seemed powerless around Patty Pie. Whatever she would suggest, we all would go along with, even though her intentions never seemed kind. The farm had an old silo on the property. It was old and decrepit, and looking back now, probably hadn't been used in a good 5 to 10 years. My cousin Patricia suggested that we play a game called Killers Are Coming. She instructed us to break off into pairs. One pair would hide and the other pair would search while chanting the line, "Killers are coming." Patty Pie told us she had learned it from some movie. She also volunteered to be my partner, and I remember feeling my stomach drop at that news. I didn't want to be around her without the boys. Of course, I was too shy and scared to protest, so off I went with Cousin Patricia to hide. I immediately knew where we were going. I could read the look in Patty Pie's eyes. She wanted to hide in the silo, and that's exactly where she led me. As the boys gave us proper time to hide, Patty Pie led me to and around the silo to the back side. There was a door on that side. Patty Pie said we should get in because it was by far the best hiding spot on the farm. She opened the door, and to this day, I still remember the smell that came out from inside the silo. It smelled of damp, dark stuff, like someplace that hadn't seen sunshine in a very long time. Patty Pie pushes me in, so forcefully that I actually stumbled over and landed on my side. Then, instead of coming in the silo with me, she slams the door shut. The blackness was instant, and so was my fear. I remember immediately being angry at my father. Why would he leave me here? Couldn't he see that I didn't want to stay? I pictured my parents and sisters sitting around the dinner table smiling and laughing, and I was stuck in this smelly old silo. I was in here in the pitch-dark nothing. My mind began to imagine horrifying situations. I pictured an old farmer's hand flicking the switch on the grain elevator, and the silo began to fill up until I was buried beneath. I pictured something dark and sinister lurking in the silo with me and ready to attack at any moment. I began to freak out and started yelling for someone to get me out. That's when I heard her laughter. She was right outside the door listening to me and laughing. I pictured Patty Pie standing there with a red smile spreading clear across her face like some gross wound. Suddenly, it has occurred to me that for as scared as I was stuck inside the dark silo, I'm actually happy she wasn't in there with me. Eventually, after what seemed like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, I heard the boys' voices. They were coming to find us and were close. I heard movement, and with a loud creak, the silo door opened. The daylight was blinding at first to my eyes. Eventually, they adjusted themselves, and Patty Pie was there. She just gave me a look of utter disgust, and then the boys were there. We walked back to the house and didn't play any more of that game. Patricia never mentioned the incident to me, and that was the end of it. It would not, however, be the last time Patty Pie was outside my door. I remember few details about that evening until the pointy shoes incident. I know we had dinner and played a few games of aggravation, a marble and dice board game. I recall Patricia did not play the board game. I remember going to bed. For reasons still unknown to me, I was put in the spare bedroom to sleep by myself. I thought it was strange that I couldn't sleep in the boys' room, but decided best not to mention it. The farmhouse was old with uneven wood floors. One could not find a square inch that didn't creak when stepped upon. When my Aunt Helen wished me a good night and turned off the lights, I immediately noticed there was a 2 to 3 inch gap beneath the door and floor. The light from the hallway bathroom would come through that gap and act as a nightlight. I was happy to have it. I drifted off to sleep. Something woke me from my sleep at around midnight. It was about 10 minutes of trying to go back to sleep when I heard the creak of Patty Pie's door. It could have been any door in the house, but I knew it was hers. I could hear each step, creak, step, creak, toward my door. I was paralyzed with fear. I pulled the cover up tight around me and peeked at the door through my fingers. When the steps were right outside my door, I could see the shoes through the gap of the door. They were black and pointy. They arrived at the door and just stopped. I lay there clutching the blanket and staring at those feet. The shoes were off-putting. I could not move. I could only stare at the pointy shoes. Patty Pie was right outside that door, and she was probably showing that horrifying smile of hers, and she was going to do something really bad to me. And I couldn't even move. I could just lay there and wait. At some point, I remember peeing myself. This game went on for what had to be at least 5 hours. I never once took my eyes off the shoes, and the door never opened. She just stood outside and listened to me breathing. Finally, the first sign of sunrise came to the window, and eventually I fell asleep. When I woke, the pointy shoes were gone. I didn't see Patricia the next day. My dad picked me up in the morning, and she had not yet come out of her room. I recall being very tired on the way home from being up all night watching that door and those horrible pointy shoes. I fell asleep in the car and never spoke of the incident to my family. I never spent the night over at their house again. I told my dad I didn't want to, and he seemed to silently understand. I also never brought it up to Patricia in the remaining years of her life. She died in an automobile accident at the age of 25. They said she survived the initial crash, but was consumed by the flames. When I learned of the manner of her death, my first thought was that Patty Pie had returned to the flames of hell where she had first spawned. I did not attend her funeral. When I was a kid, I stayed the night at a friend's house. I'd been there many times before, but I had never stayed the night there. His mom was a heavy smoker, and his dad drank a lot of beer. Besides that, they were the perfect family. So my buddies and I stayed up late eating junk food, drinking soda, and playing N64. Around 2 a.m., we all decided to go to sleep. I woke up to the sound of a crash, like someone had knocked over the good china. I tried to wake up my friends, but they wouldn't move. So I crept up the stairs alone in the dark. When I got to the top step, I saw something had tipped over onto the dining room table. As I got closer, I could barely make out two figures. One was my friend's dad, his head trapped between what had fallen and the table. The other was just a shadow. Its head twisted in my direction and screeched. I just stood there, terrified. The walls began to tremble almost to the sound of its scream. Finally, I screamed, "Go away!" I felt something shove me backwards, and I flew through walls and the ground until I hit the floor of the basement. I didn't know what happened. I figured it was a bad dream and fell asleep again. When I awoke the next morning, I was really itchy. It was also really hot. It was the summer, so it wasn't unusual. But I felt like I wasn't around my friends. I got out of my sleeping bag and looked around. Nothing looked the same. I yelled for my friends and the adults, but got no response. I walked around crying for what felt like hours, until I started to hear voices underneath me. I heard them calling my name. I couldn't tell who it was at the time, so I was silent. After a few minutes, I heard my mom. She was praying for me to come home. I heard her crying, and I called out to her. She stopped so abruptly I almost didn't notice until she started screaming for my dad. After a few minutes of me crying and her consoling me, they found me in the attic. From what I could gather, I had apparently disappeared from my friend's house in the middle of the night 4 days prior. They thought I had been kidnapped, as my friends' families checked out. Police had been looking for me, family, friends, almost the whole town. All the while, I was in the attic. So everyone understands, there was not an entryway to the attic in the house. If you wanted to get in there, you had to go through a window on the side of the house. You would need a 20-foot ladder plus power tools. But I was around 10. The only other way was to break through the ceiling inside the house. I was taken to the hospital, interviewed by police and psychiatrists, and they all couldn't explain what happened. I had 5 long scratches down my back, all parallel and the same length and width, marks along my arms and legs, and the white of one of my eyes was red for a month. My eyes are normally blue, but one was red and blue. I didn't show signs of torture or psychological distress. It was like I teleported there. I was extremely hungry and obviously confused, but nobody knows what happened or how. It's been many years now, and to this day nobody has any clue what happened. I've always been skeptical about ghosts and the paranormal. But what happened to me in a hotel room outside Charleston, South Carolina, changed my mind. In fall 2022, I was traveling for work and ended up staying in this old colonial-style hotel. It was charming in a way. Creaky floors, antique furniture, but definitely showed its age. They assigned me room 313, and though I joked about the number being unlucky, the front desk clerk didn't seem amused. The first sign something was off came that very first night. While brushing my teeth, I noticed the bathroom mirror's reflection was strange. It didn't line up perfectly with my movements. When I waved my hand, the reflection responded with a faint delay, like it was a second behind me. I thought it might just be a trick of the lighting or my tired eyes, so I ignored it. Later, at 2:39 a.m., I woke up suddenly, chilled to the bone. The heater was silent, and the room was freezing cold, far colder than I had left it. Then from the bathroom, I heard slow tapping on the mirror, like fingernails lightly drumming on glass. When the tapping stopped, I heard the faucet turn on. I was sure I had turned everything off before bed, so I got up to check. The cold water was running and the mirror was fogged up even though no hot water had been on. On the glass, there was a small smudged handprint, like a child's hand. The bathroom lights flickered once, and the air felt heavy and wrong. I backed away, afraid, and stayed up the rest of the night, sitting in the chair with the main room light on until dawn. I checked out first thing in the morning. The front desk clerk didn't ask why. I think she already knew. Later, I found a review online warning others not to stay in room 313 because the mirror isn't a mirror. I'm still not sure what I experienced, but that night made me realize some things might be beyond explanation.